June 18, 2018, Jahseh Onfroy, known as XXXTentacion, was shot and killed outside a motorcycle dealership in Florida. He was 20 years old. The hip-hop world mourned. Millions of fans grieved, and everyone assumed that was the end of his story. But the audio engineer who'd worked in X's home studio knows different, because X didn't stop making music when he died. New songs kept appearing, vocals that sounded too fresh, too raw, too present to be old recordings. The engineer has heard them, recorded them, and what he experienced in that studio after X's death convinced him that something impossible is happening. X's spirit never left. It's still creating, still recording, still trying to finish what it started. This is the story of a dead rapper who won't stop making music. And once you hear what's been happening in that Florida studio, you'll understand why his posthumous releases sound so eerily alive. The engineer first met X in early 2017. X was just breaking out. Raw talent, intense energy, chaotic but brilliant. They worked together on several tracks. The engineer watched X's process, how he'd go into a trance-like state while recording. Eyes closed, body swaying, like he was channeling something. X talked about it once, said he didn't write songs in the traditional sense, said the music came through him, from somewhere else. The engineer thought it was artistic talk, poetic description of the creative process, but X was serious, insistent. I'm just a vessel, he'd say. The music exists already. I'm just the one who can hear it. X had a home studio, a small setup in his house. Nothing fancy, but he spent hours there, days. Sometimes he wouldn't sleep, just record, layer vocals, experiment. The engineer would get calls at 3 a.m. X needing help with mixing, with effects, with capturing a sound he heard in his head. The engineer would come over, and the energy in that studio was always strange, heavy, like the room held more than just equipment. X felt it too, would talk about seeing shadows in the corners, hearing whispers in the playback. Once, during a late session, X stopped mid-verse, stayed at the corner of the room, said, "He's here, watching." The engineer asked him. X just shook his head. "The one who's waiting for me." That conversation haunted the engineer, especially after X died, because it sounded like premonition, like X knew something was coming. And in the weeks before his death, X's behavior changed. He became obsessed with finishing his music, with getting everything recorded. He told the engineer he was running out of time, that he needed to leave something behind. The engineer thought X meant his legacy, his impact. But now, looking back, he wonders if X meant something more literal. If X knew he was about to die, and was preparing to continue from the other side, the day X died, the engineer was at home. Got the call from a mutual friend. Couldn't believe it. Refused to believe it. X was supposed to come by the studio that evening. They had a session planned. The engineer went anyway, to the studio, to X's house. And when he walked into that room where they'd recorded so many tracks, he felt it immediately. A presence, heavy, watching. The equipment was off, but the microphone was still set up. And as the engineer stood there, grieving, he heard something that made his blood freeze. A breath coming through the monitors, Even though nothing was powered on, he checked the equipment. Everything was off, unplugged even, but the sound continued. Soft, rhythmic, breathing. The engineer ran. Didn't come back for weeks. Tried to process what he'd experienced. Tried to rationalize it. Grief, hallucination, stress, imagination. But he couldn't shake the feeling that X was still there. Still in the studio. Still waiting to record. Months passed. XS team started talking about posthumous releases. They had vault recordings, unfinished tracks, verses X had laid down but never completed. The engineer was brought in to help sort through the material, to clean up the audio, make it releasable. And that's when things got strange. The engineer would be working on a track, an old recording, something X had done months before his death, and he'd hear new elements, ad-libs that weren't there before, breaths in different places, vocal inflections that sounded fresh, like they'd been recorded recently. He checked the session files, the timestamps. Everything showed these were old recordings. Nothing had been added, but his ears told him different. He brought in other engineers, asked them to listen blind, without telling them what to listen for, and they all said the same thing. Parts of these vocals sounded new, like X had come back and re-recorded sections, but that was impossible. X was dead. The first posthumous album dropped. Schemes, released in December 2018. 6 months after X's death, the engineer worked on several tracks, and during those sessions, he experienced things he still can't explain. Equipment turning on by itself, session files opening when no one touched the computer, and voices, faint but present, in the room, whispering. When he'd rewind sections, he'd hear phrases that weren't in the original recording. XS voice, clear as day, saying things like, "Keep going. That's it. We are not done." The engineer started documenting everything, recording his sessions, not just the music, but the room, the atmosphere. And when he played back those recordings, he heard things that weren't audible in real time. XS voice, humming, singing, speaking, full sentences, full verses, on tracks that supposedly only had fragments. The engineer has these files, keeps them backed up in 3 different locations, because he knows how insane it sounds. But he also knows what he heard, what he continues to hear. Other engineers started reporting similar experiences. Producers who worked with XS material, mixing engineers, mastering engineers, all of them separately, without communicating with each other, described the same phenomena. New vocal takes appearing, session files changing, the feeling of being watched while working, and dreams. Vivid, recurring dreams where X would appear, give them notes, tell them how to finish the songs. Some thought it was their subconscious, their brains filling in what X would have wanted, but the specificity was too detailed, the creative choices too unexpected. It was like X was directing from beyond. The engineer researched paranormal phenomena related to artists and their work, and he found patterns. Musicians who died young often had similar stories. Tupac, Biggie, Amy Winehouse, artists whose posthumous material felt eerily present, whose studios reported strange occurrences, whose collaborators described experiences that sounded like hauntings. But XS case was different. because the music kept coming. Not just folk material being released, but new elements, new arrangements, new vocals that couldn't be explained. In 2019, the second posthumous album dropped, Bad Vibes Forever. The engineer worked on it, and by this point, he'd stopped trying to rationalize what was happening. He just accepted it, worked with it. When he'd sit down to mix, he'd feel excess presence. Sometimes he'd speak out loud. What do you want here? X? How should this sound? And he'd get answers. Not words exactly, but feelings, intuitions, sudden clarity about how a section should be arranged. He'd make the changes, and every time, it worked. The songs felt complete, whole, like X had approved. That X's mother, Cleopatra, visited the studio once. The engineer was nervous, didn't know if he should mention the experiences, but she brought it up first. Said she felt X around her constantly, that he visited her dreams, that he wasn't gone, just different. The engineer told her about the studio, about the new vocals, the presence. Cleopatra nodded, unsurprised. Jahseh told me before he died that if anything happened to him, he'd find a way to finish his music. He said death wouldn't stop him. I thought he was being dramatic, but I don't think he was. I think he found a way. The engineer learned about something called instrumental transcommunication, electronic voice phenomena, the idea that spirits can communicate through electronic devices, through radio static, through recording equipment, and music production equipment is perfect for this. Microphones designed to capture the faintest sounds, software that can amplify and isolate frequencies. What if X's spirit learned to manipulate these tools, to inject his voice into the recordings, to continue creating using the same technology he used in life? The engineer tested this theory, set up recording sessions with no one in the room, just turned on the equipment, let it run, and when he played back the recordings, he heard things, whispers, hums, and occasionally clear words. X's voice, not full songs, but fragments, ideas, musical phrases. The engineer started compiling these, creating a database of what he's calling spirit sessions. Material that appeared with no living person present. He doesn't know what to do with it, can't release it officially, can't prove its origin, but he has it, and it's growing. By 2020, the engineer realized something disturbing. The posthumous music was getting better, more cohesive, more intentional, like X was learning, adapting, figuring out how to create from wherever he was. The early posthumous releases felt fragmented, patched together from old recordings, but recent material sounds purposeful, complete. Like X is developing skills in death that he didn't have in life. Like he's evolving as an artist. Even though he's dead, the engineer started researching X's beliefs when he was alive. Found interviews where X talked about reincarnation, about energy never dying, about consciousness existing beyond the body. X believed he'd lived multiple lives, that death was just a transition. And he talked about wanting to impact people even after he was gone. What if X meant that literally? What if he prepared for this? Found a way to anchor his consciousness to his music, to the studio, to the creative process? The most disturbing evidence came in 2021. The engineer was working late, alone in the studio, and he heard footsteps, clear, deliberate, coming from the hallway. He froze, called out, no response. The footsteps stopped at the studio door. The handle turned, the door opened, and there was no one there. But the temperature dropped. The engineer could see his breath. And then the microphone activated. By itself, the preamp lit up. Phantom power engaged. And through the monitors, a voice. Excess voice, not a recording. Live, in real time, saying, we need to finish what we started. The engineer didn't run this time, didn't freak out, just asked, what do you need? And for the next hour, he worked. X would hum melodies. The engineer would play them on keyboard. X would suggest changes. The engineer would make them. They created a full instrumental track. And at the end, X's voice said, name it legacy. This is what I leave behind. Then the presence faded. The temperature returned to normal. The equipment powered down. And the engineer sat there, shaking, staring at the session file that definitely, impossibly existed. He saved it, encrypted it, didn't tell anyone, but has listened to it hundreds of times. And it's X unmistakably. The melodic choices, the rhythm, the energy. It's not old material. It's new, created in that session, by a dead man, through electronic equipment. And the engineer doesn't know if he's going insane or if he's witnessing something unprecedented. A ghost using technology to continue his art. Other people connected to X started coming forward. Quietly, privately. A videographer who worked on X's music videos said he sees X in footage. Not in the old videos, in new footage. Reflections in windows. Shadows in corners, figures that weren't there during filming. A photographer who documented X's career has images that show anomalies, orbs, light distortions, shapes that look like X's silhouette, appearing in photos taken years after his death, at his memorial, at tribute events, like X is showing up, watching, participating. Fans report experiences too. Listeners who've had XS music save their lives, who felt his presence during dark moments, who've dreamed of him giving them advice. Some dismiss it as grief, parasocial attachment, the mind creating comfort. But the consistency is striking. The details are specific. And many of these fans had these experiences before knowing others had them too. Before comparing notes. Before realizing this was a pattern, the engineer believes X's consciousness is trapped. Not in a negative way. Not suffering, but bound to his music. Unable or unwilling to move on until his artistic vision is complete. And because X died young, with so much unfinished, with so many ideas unrealized, his spirit remains, working, creating, using anyone and anything available to manifest his art. The engineer has become a medium, a conduit, and has accepted this role because the music that comes through is extraordinary, is meaningful, is helping people, but there's a cost. The engineer's life has changed. He doesn't sleep well, has nightmares where he's in the studio but can't leave, can't stop recording. He feels watched constantly, followed by a presence that isn't hostile but isn't entirely benign either. It's obsessive, driven, excess personality amplified by whatever death does to consciousness. And the engineer worries. Worries about what happens when excess vision is complete. What happens when there's no more music to make? Will X finally move on? Or will he find another purpose, another person, another way to stay anchored to this world? The engineer has started researching exorcism, not because he wants X gone, but because he needs to understand the mechanism. How does a spirit attach to creative work? How does consciousness persist through electromagnetic frequencies? How does a dead person continue to grow, learn, and create? The answers aren't in religious texts. They are in quantum physics, in theories about consciousness and energy, in the idea that maybe death isn't an ending, just a transformation. And for some people, especially artists, the transformation allows them to continue their work, using new methods, new mediums, new collaborators who may not even realize they are being used. The latest posthumous material in development is the most complex yet. Full albums worth of songs that the engineer sways are being created in real time, not assembled from old vocals. Actually created, excess voice adapting, evolving, sounding older, more mature, like his aging in death, growing as an artist, developing new techniques, and the engineer is facilitating it, recording sessions with a ghost, mixing tracks for a dead man, and producing music that millions will hear, never knowing the true source, never understanding that what they are listening to was created by a consciousness that exists beyond physical reality. The engineer is speaking now because he can't carry this alone anymore. Because the world deserves to know that X didn't stop. That his promise to never stop making music was literal. That death was just a transition, a new studio, a new way of working, and that somewhere in the frequencies and digital waveforms, in the spaces between silence and sound, X is still there, still creating, still pouring his energy into music, still trying to heal people, still refusing to be forgotten. This isn't about proving ghosts exist. The engineer doesn't care about that. This is about honoring an artist's dedication, about understanding that some people are so connected to their art that not even death can separate them. X lived for his music, and apparently is willing to die for it too, over and over, staying present, staying active, staying creative, until his work is truly done. And the engineer, haunted and changed and blessed and cursed, will keep helping, keep recording, keep being the bridge between worlds, because that's what X needs. And when a ghost asks you to help finish their masterpiece, you don't say no. You just record, mix, produce, and try not to think too hard about the impossibility of it all.